Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7. My name is Douglas MacKenzie and tonight we'll bring you stories from Scotland and around the world. And I'm delighted to say that this evening I am joined by Maureen Watt to discuss these stories. Maureen is a wheel-Kent face on Broadcasting Scotland, and in this programme she was a MSP for many years and a Scottish Government Minister with responsibilities in education, training and skills, and also in health. Welcome, Maureen.
Hi, Douglas. Good to see you again.
And you. We start as usual in the news with an update from Ukraine on this day 881 since Russia's invasion of the country. Ukraine's Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba is in China on Tuesday for talks on how officials there might help end the war with Russia. China presents itself as a neutral party in the war. However, its deepening no-limits partnership with Russia led NATO members to declare it a decisive enabler of the invasion. The US and Europe have accused Beijing of sending components and equipment used to keep Russian military production going. Hungary will not be allowed to host a strategic EU meeting next month because of Viktor Orban's self-proclaimed peace mission trips to Moscow and Beijing without the union's authority. We have to send a signal, even if it is a symbolic signal, said the EU Foreign Affairs Chief Josep Borrell, explaining that he had decided the upcoming Foreign and Defence Ministers meeting would take place in Brussels instead of Budapest. Hungary holds a rotating EU presidency and as such would normally host the annual late August gathering. Ukraine's top commander said on Monday that Russian forces were staging relentless assaults to try to advance towards the town of Pokrovsk, a logistics hub in the east, and that there was active fighting taking place along the entire front line. Colonel General Alexander Syrski said fierce battles raged near several eastern villages and towns, including Krasnohorivka and Chasiv Yar, a strategic hilltop town whose capture would bring Russia closer to threatening important Donetsk region cities. A Russian court has sentenced Alsu Kurmasheva, a Russian-American journalist for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, to more than 6 years in prison for spreading false information about the Russian army. Her husband, Pavel Buterin, who also works for RFE-RL, said her arrest was related to a book that she had edited, which is entitled Saying No to War, 40 Stories of Russians Who Opposed the Russian Invasion of Ukraine. The RFE-RL president and CEO, Stephen Kapus, called Kurmasheva's rapid, secretly held trial and conviction a mockery of justice. Kurmasheva, 47, is based in Prague, but was arrested while visiting family in Tatarstan, Russia. Ukraine's government said on Monday it had struck a preliminary deal with international creditors to restructure government debt worth more than $20 billion. Several thousand people have attended the funeral in Lviv of Irina Faryon, a former Ukrainian MP who was assassinated on Friday. Faryon was best known for her campaigns to promote the speaking of Ukrainian language. Ukrainian police are searching for the unidentified assassin. And the EU has extended sanctions against Russia for a further 6 months, until the 31st of January 2025. Maureen, we've spoken very often on this programme about battles, incursions, movement. There is at least something today about a peace process following on from Ukraine's own organisation of peace talks. Can we hope for anything from China?
Well, I think as long as there are talks, there is hope. And I take my hat off to Ukraine to sending people to China. It's almost going right into the teeth of the enemy to talk, to see if anything can come out of it. And it's good that it's happening insofar as China can hear another side of the story rather than what is being fed to them by Putin. So I think that is very positive. Whether it bears fruit or not will be interesting to see. I also think that the EU coming down hard on Viktor Orban is very interesting. I mean, it is clear that he is just a Putin disruptor, but within the EU, holding the holding the rotating presidency. Is it presidency holding the rotating chair of the EU for 6 months is very prestigious, and the fact that the EU are prepared to take that away from Hungary in terms of not having meetings in Hungary, I think is also very significant and will clearly really annoy Viktor Orban. We see obviously too that the jailing of the Russian journalist without any decency of a trial is important, as is the assassination of the Ukrainian MP who promoted the Ukrainian language. Clearly, well, you would think the obvious answer to those is that Putin and his regime are behind those two. Anything that will demoralize, disrupt the Ukrainian people is nothing. They stop at absolutely nothing. But when you mentioned the fact about restructuring Ukrainian's government's debt, I mean, life has to go on for people in Ukraine, hasn't it? Even within the rubble and the devastation that is going on. I mean, clearly Ukraine, if left to its own devices, is a very rich country in so many natural resources. And as we have seen, when the boats have been stopped coming out of Odessa and the Crimean region, boats that were feeding people with grain in Africa. So the importance of Ukraine worldwide can never be underestimated by those who think that we should just bow down and kowtow to Russia.
Absolutely, thank you. Yes, it's not called the breadbasket for nothing, Ukraine. Moving on to the latest from Israel and Gaza. At least 39,090 people have been killed and 90,147 wounded in Gaza since October the 7th, the Gaza Health Ministry has said. The Israeli military has launched a fresh attack on the southern Gaza city of Khan Yunis, killing at least 70 people, according to medics, after ordering Palestinians to leave several neighborhoods, including areas that had been designated by the military as part of a humanitarian zone. Palestinian civil defense in the territory estimated that 400,000 people sheltering in the city were affected by the order, which included the eastern part of Al-Mawasi, a sandy strip of land without infrastructure, where Palestinians have sought shelter in tent encampments in recent months. Leaders from Hamas, Fatah and other Palestinian factions have agreed after 3 days of talks in Beijing to form a national unity government at an unspecified point in the future, in a move that has bolstered China's status as a global mediator, particularly in the Middle East. The Beijing Declaration, signed by 14 Palestinian factions, also represents a significant step forward in negotiations between the groups, although it is light on detail about how to actually achieve Palestinian unification. Aidil Sabardakov, the WHO's head of health emergencies in the occupied Palestinian territories, has said that polio is not the only disease that risks spreading in Gaza. He said he is also worried about other outbreaks because water sanitation remains in a very dire situation. Israeli settlers have set fire to olive groves in the village of Burin, south of Nablus in the occupied West Bank. Adel Khodr, Regional Director for Middle East and North Africa for the UN Children's Agency, says that 2 clearly marked vehicles have been hit with live ammunition while waiting at a designated holding point near the Wadi Gaza checkpoint. The vehicles were en route to reunite 5 children, including a baby, with their father, she posted on X. The team managed to proceed with the mission and safely deliver the children. Cotter noted that humanitarian workers are protected under international humanitarian law and must not be targeted. An estimated 15,000 Palestinian children have been killed since Israel launched its war on Gaza in October, a figure likely far higher, with thousands missing. Again, no good news coming from Gaza, and it seems that wherever the Palestinians are herded to, they stay there for a little while, and then they're chased on again with no respite. Do you see any hope for the future, Maureen?
Yeah, it's just like, herding flocks of sheep, isn't it? And just moving them around. It's absolutely horrific. I think what's interesting, though, on the back of the ruling of the International Court of Justice, is the situation in the West Bank, and how Israelis are acting there, and how Hezbollah are reacting to that. I mean, that could quite easily be the next tinderbox in the Middle East, and it's really important that doesn't happen. And we see a repetition of what's happened in Gaza in the West Bank, and I think it could be so much worse because of the thousands of settlers that there are illegally in the West Bank. So I think it's important to keep an eye on what's happening there. It's clear, because of the outbreaks of diseases, that the aid is not reaching in any tangible, insignificant way the people who need it in Gaza. And yet, I haven't heard in the mainstream media anyway of any significant talks that have been taking place recently on this conflict. So it looks as if Benjamin Netanyahu is going to get his way and keep it going at least till the end of the year.
Yeah, and I asked you with regard to Ukraine if the Chinese peacemaking was likely to have any effect. It's quite remarkable that they've managed to get Fatah and Hamas speaking to one another in the past couple of days. I mean, that's absolutely a rarity in Palestinian politics. Is there some hope that if the Palestinians are unified, they will have more of a voice in the world?
Well, it would be great if they did, wouldn't it? I mean, the people of Gaza have really got no way of expressing their will at the moment at all, have they? And haven't had for years, but are, that's the last thing on their mind at the moment, as they just fight for their survival, their own survival, and that of their families. So it would be interesting if we saw a decline in the influence of Hamas, and that Fatah were to ascend a bit more. But I'm afraid I don't know enough about the power balance there to know whether it would make any significant difference. But if it means more people representing the Gaza round a table, then I think that is important.
Thank you. And moving on to the moving on to the main political news in Britain today. It's the King's Speech debate and the two-child cap, which is slowly moving its way towards a vote. And if that comes through, then we will go over live to that. The SNP has urged Labour MPs to do the only right thing and vote with their conscience to end the two-child cap immediately, after the Speaker of the House of Commons confirmed the SNP amendment to scrap the cap will go to a vote tonight. Stephen Flynn MP said, "Scrapping the cap is the bare minimum required to tackle the appalling levels of child poverty in the UK," and warned, It is unconscionable that the Labour government is making a political choice to push thousands of Scottish children into poverty by keeping it in place. The SNP amendment is backed by Plaid Cymru, the Green Party, the SDLP, the Alliance Party and independent MPs including Jeremy Corbyn. This morning, the SNP published new analysis showing the devastating impact the two-child cap is having on families in Scotland and across the UK. The analysis conducted by the House of Commons Library shows an estimated 87,100 children in Scotland live in households hit by the two-child cap over the last year, with a total of 1,486,760 children hit across Britain. Okay, I think we can now go across to the House of Commons. Okay, sorry, no, that was premature. Using the latest data published by the Department for Work and Pensions, the research reveals the typical cost of the two-child cap to families in Scotland this year is £287.92 a month, or £3,455 a year for families with 3 children, and £575.84 a month, or £6,910 a year for families with 4 children. In total, some of the poorest families in Scotland have lost a combined £454.8 million in financial support since the policy was introduced in 2017-2018. The new analysis shows families in every part of Scotland are being hit by the punitive policy. The data reveals Glasgow is the worst hit local authority in Scotland, with 4,500 households, 64%, in receipt of universal credit or child tax credits, not receiving financial support for at least one child as of April 2024. It is followed by Fife with 2,100 families hit, North Lanarkshire with 2,000 families hit, Edinburgh with 1,600 families, and South Lanarkshire with 1,500 families hit. Commenting ahead of the vote, SNP Westminster leader Stephen Flynn MP said, "We now know the SNP amendment will go to a vote tonight, and MPs across the chamber will have the opportunity to scrap the two-child cap and lift thousands of children out of poverty." Scrapping the cap is the bare minimum required to tackle the appalling levels of child poverty in the UK. It is unconscionable that the Labour government is making a political choice to push thousands of Scottish children into poverty by keeping it in place. For every day that Keir Starmer fails to act, more children will suffer. This punitive Westminster policy has to go, and it must go now. I urge Labour MPs to do the only right thing and vote with their conscience to end the two-child cap immediately. People in Scotland voted for change at Westminster. They will be watching this vote to make sure meaningful change is now delivered and it doesn't become a broken promise by the Labour government. Well, Maureen, following other broadcast media in Scotland, one might not have known that this was a long-standing SNP policy, and suddenly Labour MPs in Scotland were jumping on a call to scrap it. It will be interesting, I suspect, to see how many Labour MPs from Scotland will actually vote for the SNP amendment. I'm told that Labour whips were very active in the House today in making sure that their Labour members did not vote for it. Putting aside the moral argument for a moment, there is talk of Labour rebels. Is this the first test for Starmer and his whips as to whether he has his party under control, or do they just have such a big majority they'll say, these are people with their heart in the right place, we can just forget about it?
Well, it is the first test. There's no doubt about that. But how significant it will be is it's not going to be very significant, is it? Because, as you said, Douglas, Labour has a huge majority, and I honestly do not expect many rebels, particularly those new ones from Scotland, to rebel. They're going to be the Westminster Labour in Scotland rather than representatives or Labour representatives of Scotland in Westminster, and I think they will just hold their noses and be good boys and girls and vote for it this evening. But it is interesting that the vast majority of the opposition parties, apart from the Tories, are voting to remove the two-child cap. And once again, we see the SNP, not the third party anymore, but the SNP to be the effective opposition to the government in Westminster. And I'm sure there will be many other instances where the SNP are the ones that are pushing Labour members to think of their consciences and what they should be doing rather than what their whips tell them. So it'll be interesting to see if there are today, and presumably we're going to get the results within the next few minutes.
Okay, as I said earlier, we will go across to Westminster if that is voted on. Um, okay. Yeah, so it's very close to the vote. And as you say, Maureen, it's not going to the amendment is not going to win, but it will be interesting to see what effect it has on Scottish public opinion when, as Stephen Flynn says, people voted for change, and this surely would be change if it were if the cap was scrapped.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, I was out this afternoon, so I didn't have a chance to watch the debate on BBC Parliament to see if any Labour members did, in fact, speak against the two-child cap. But, you know, the Labour Party that I remember would be horrified at the two-child cap, and coming into government, it would be one of the first commitments to scrap. But Keir Starmer during the election and before was so determined to win and so determined not to rock any boats that, it wasn't mentioned. And of course, when it was mentioned, it was kind of, oh, mea culpa, we can't afford it. I hope that the pressure is kept up on them so much over the next, during this Parliament, that the pressure is kept up on them, that they're forced into a situation where they have to scrap it. The Scottish Government has done all it can through the Scottish Child Payment to mitigate the two-child cap, but with a fixed budget, you simply can't go on doing that. And the value of the child payment, I doubt whether the Scottish Government can keep increasing it without affecting other aspects of its budget. So it really is imperative that if a Labour government calls itself one that is in favour of social justice, does something about it. And I think the two-child cap has emerged as the kind of key issue that would show whether the Labour government is working in the best interests of those who can least look after themselves, which we kind of expected from a Labour government. Just a change of the colour from blue Tories to red Tories.
Yes, particularly the child payment has been hailed all over Europe as making a huge difference to poverty in Scotland, and it's sad that not more can be done. Do you think there's a chance that the two-child cap could be what should we say, the poll tax of the Labour government? An issue which really moves public opinion strongly against them.
I would hope so, but it's perhaps, we say that it affects, 87,100 families in Scotland. every single one of them is one that it shouldn't affect. And it would make a huge difference to those families living in poverty if that was lifted. But whether a sufficient number of people who are not affected are interested in it and want to campaign for it, I'm not sure yet. We would have to wait and see. And I think, depending on what happens tonight and whether there are any rebels and how many, may determine what the tactics are going forward to keep this at the forefront of the Labour government and continue to shame them on their behaviour.
Yeah. How do you think the Labour Party in Scotland will play this tomorrow, when presumably the amendment fails, when they have tried to come out and say that they're in favour of scrapping it? And reading some reports, one might have thought that Anas Sarwar, it was his idea to scrap it. A very strange representation in the press.
Yeah, I mean, it's only pressure from the SNP that has made Labour in Scotland and Anas Sarwar change their minds on it, whether he thinks this is enough of an issue to show that he's got an independent mind from Westminster and he's not dictated to by Keir Starmer and Labour at Westminster will be interesting to see. Yeah, very interesting to see. Unfortunately, it is happening in a time when the Scottish Parliament is in recess, so it's not something that can be kept going, for example, at FMQs on Thursday. So it'll be interesting to see what the response is of Anas Sarwar. It'd be nice if, just, 10 or so Labour MPs from Scotland showed a bit of mettle on this from these killer areas that you mentioned, Glasgow, Edinburgh, Fife, North Lanarkshire, where it's really hitting hard, if they were to represent their constituents' interests rather than the interests of the Labour Party as they see it.
It would be rather ironic, would it not, if we had Labour MPs in Scotland blaming Westminster for things which Scotland has no control over.
Well, I honestly don't know why Labour MPs and the shadow cabinet, in the run up to this election, didn't see that this could be a key issue, for the election and post election, and would be brought up in the Queen's speech. The King's speech, because it's clearly something that can be squarely put at Labour's door. Okay, they didn't implement it, but if it's so bad as so many organisations are saying, those working charitable organisations, the Poverty Alliance, or all these kind of organisations are saying what a difference it could make immediately if it was scrapped. Those 87,100 families in Scotland, never mind the millions it affects throughout the rest of the UK. I mean, if there's going to be levelling up and, a bit of a redistribution of money, surely it should have been just, the one key issue where you might have seen a bit of what we would normally expect from Labour, rather than being just Tories.
Order. ayes to the right, 103. The noes to the left, 363.
The ayes were 103, the noes were 363, so the noes have it unlocked.
Well, there we have the result, Maureen. I don't know how quickly you can do the arithmetic in your head, but very large majority rejecting it, but still a significant number of 103 voting for the amendment.
Yeah, it's difficult to know without seeing the who went through the division lobbies, but 463, that means an awful lot of people weren't there, and I noticed that the Tory benches were just deserted. So, one wonders what they did. Did they abstain and just not take part in this? I'm not sure whether the 70-odd Liberal Democrats voted against it or not. So we're among the ayes. So they have a separate amendment, is my understanding. So, we really need to see what the division is before we rush to any judgment. I suspect we'll hear more about it hopefully in the mainstream media later on this evening.
Okay, there's also a vote to be held in the House on the Liberal Democrat amendment, which we will bring to you when that comes up. With more British news today, the Home Office has announced that the Bibi Stockholm, the controversial barge which has been used to accommodate asylum seekers, is to be shut down. Use of the vessel, which is housing 400 people and is moored at Dorset, will end when the current contract ends in January 2025. The Home Office said in an announcement that ending the use of the Bibi Stockholm formed part of an expected $7.7 billion of savings in asylum costs over the next 10 years. The large vessel became an emblem of the last UK government's approach to migration. Last year, Leonard Faruku, a musician who was seeking asylum after travelling from Albania, is thought to have killed himself on the barge. Extending its use would have cost more than £20 million next year, according to the department. The giant vessel where a man seeking asylum apparently killed himself last year became a flagship element of the last government's approach to migration. The Minister for Border Security and Asylum, Angela Eagle, said, "We are determined to restore order to the asylum system so that it operates swiftly, firmly and fairly and ensures that the rules are properly enforced." Well, that symbol from the last government is gone and the flights to Rwanda have gone. I mean, what strikes me, Maureen, is what an incredible amount of money has been spent on schemes which did nothing, could do nothing, and where the money could have been spent on genuinely helping refugees and immigration.
Yeah, well, yesterday I did have a chance to watch some of the debate yesterday when they were discussing this, and it was clear from what was being said by Yvette Cooper that the Tories didn't have a plan at all to deal with asylum seekers and get the number coming down and get the number claiming asylum processed. And I think by scrapping the Rwanda scheme and the Bibi Stockholm, the money, hopefully, that is saved from these two projects will be put into people being able to process asylum claims more quickly and treat asylum seekers with the dignity and respect that they deserve. And, as I say, process their applications and make sure that it's dealt with quickly and that people are either sent back to their own countries if it's safe to do so, if their asylum claim is not met, or if it is, integrated properly into society in Britain and able to work and make a decent living and a life here. So this is, in my view, two steps in the right direction, but how quickly it will manifest itself in any change in the numbers being processed will be interesting to see.
Thank you. Another UK story which obviously has ramifications for Scotland. New research has found that 40% of the growers of strawberries and raspberries in the UK could go out of business by the end of 2026 amid rising costs and poor pay from supermarkets. Almost half of UK growers said they no longer make a profit, and 53% reported the financial health of their business as bad or very bad, according to a survey by British Berry Growers, BBG, an industry body that represents farmers producing 95% of the berries sold in the UK. If problems are not addressed, BBG warned a future massive reduction in the supply of fresh British berries. More than a third of those surveyed, 37%, are already considering reducing their production or moving out of berry farming entirely, while 39% said their relationship with retailers had never been this bad, according to the study. Nick Marston, the chair of BBG, said, "We must take this survey as a wake-up call and a sign to take urgent action. The future of this great sector hangs in the balance. It would be a travesty to lose British berries. We need support from retailers in the form of fair returns, but we also need support from the government to ensure we have an uninterrupted supply of pickers during our peak season. The cost of production has risen 30% for growers, but this has not been reflected in the prices paid by retailers," he added. While the cost of a punnet of strawberries in the shops went up by an average 27 pence between 2021 and last year, for example, growers' returns only increased by 3.5 pence. BBG wants the government to increase the length of the seasonal worker scheme visa for overseas pickers from 6 to 9 months so that people are available throughout the growing season. It also wants improvements to the export system to make it easier for growers to take advantage of market opportunities in the EU and further afield. Marston said the volume of berry exports had fallen to a seventh of pre-Brexit levels because of the introduction of complex rules such as phytosanitary checks since the UK left the EU. These figures, Maureen, are for the UK as a whole. I know you live in a very fine strawberry growing area. I don't know if you have any knowledge of what's happening to farmers in your neck of the woods. But I mean, this covers all sorts of things which are a problem at the moment: immigration, relationship with Europe post Brexit, and the power of the supermarkets. So what's your experience in this area and what people are saying?
Well, I love berries. I enjoyed, as a kid, being taken to pick them, whether it was strawberries or raspberries or whatever, to help my mum or my granny make jam. And I occasionally make it too. So I am really interested in this area. I think it's an absolute travesty that the UK government is allowing this industry to decline. It'd be interesting to see what the figures are for the industry in Scotland, because it is huge. But I can see that people are stopping production already. I passed the other day in Perthshire, the place that used to grow loads and loads of black currants, because they provided all the black currants to make Ribena in this country, and they were undercut by an Eastern European country. I can't remember which one, and now they just are lying with doing nothing. So it is so short-sighted, because with climate change, growing berries, Scotland is going to be more of a goer than it is in countries where there are droughts. So here, as you say, Douglas, we're seeing the combined effects of lack of workers to pick the berries. And we heard yesterday Keir Starmer say that he was going to up the skills of British people to work in British industries and British areas. I wonder how that's going to affect the berry growers, and Brexit, which has affected the export of the berries, because you did find Scottish berries on your plates in Spain and the other countries in Europe. So it's a real shame, and I really do hope that there's some intervention to protect the berry fields of Blair, which have provided so much of our culture and song over the centuries. And I just love going through Perthshire at this time of year and stopping to pick up berries that have been picked that morning.
Yeah, yes, I share that. Another UK story with some ramifications for Scotland and with themes echoed in recent political debates in Scotland. The new Labour government business secretary, Jonathan Reynolds, has said he is confident that the Harland and Wolff shipyard in Belfast will continue to build ships for the Royal Navy, despite ruling out government support for the struggling company. Harland and Wolff is part of a consortium on a £1.6 billion contract to build 3 naval fleet solid support ships to supply the Royal Navy's aircraft carriers. However, it has faced months of uncertainty over its future. The government on Monday confirmed that it had refused to grant a £200 million loan guarantee to help the struggling company to refinance. The shipbuilder had hoped to secure a guarantee of up to 80% of any loan value to help it avoid collapsing into administration for the second time in 5 years. But the guarantee would have put taxpayer money at risk if the shipyard fails. Harland and Wolff's precarious finances add to a series of industrial policy challenges already mounting up for the Labour government, including the prospect of job losses at Tata Steel's plant in South Wales and the proposed takeover of Royal Mail's owner by the Czech billionaire Daniel Kretinsky. Reynolds also revealed on Monday that the government was likely to call in Kretinsky's Royal Mail bid for a formal review. Speaking to reporters at the Farnborough International Air Show in Hampshire, Reynolds said support for Harland and Wolff would not have been a prudent use of government money. Harland and Wolff also operate yards in Scotland at Methil and Arnish. The UK government response to the Harland and Wolff crisis is in marked contrast to how the Scottish government has dealt with Ferguson Marine. The nationalised Port Glasgow shipyard was awarded £14.2 million from the Scottish government last week to invest in modernising the yard. Yeah, interesting, Maureen. For a while, we heard nothing in political debate from the opposition in Scotland except ferries, ferries, ferries. And now, are we going to hear Labour MSPs and Labour MPs in Scotland criticising the government for not investing in Harland and Wolff?
I think all my life, the shipbuilding industry has been one that has lurched from crisis to crisis. And it's because, a country wants to build ships, especially its defence vessels, in its own country. But there's never been a proper pipeline of work to these companies for vessels, naval vessels or, patrol vessels in the North Sea or whatever it is, a proper 10-year, 20-year pipeline to make sure that there's a steady stream of work coming to the yards, whether it's shared out between different yards or different yards do different bits. I mean, that's kind of how Norway works it now. The hull might be built somewhere else and then it's taken to another yard to get fitted out. So there's never been this. And, to its credit, the Scottish government was trying to do that with ferries, although it got a bit, shall we say, to put it mildly. But it is really the government's fault in a way, because if you knew that you were going to get so many vessels over so many years, you could then slot in when you could do other work for private companies or other countries. So I think the government, the UK government, has got a responsibility here for the workers. As in Belfast, which I've visited the cranes there, and it's a great place now to visit.
The ayes to the right, 85. The noes to the left, 382.
The ayes were 85, the noes were 382, so the noes have it, unlocked.
So that was the result of the vote on the Liberal Democrats' amendment in Westminster on the child cap tonight. Even less support for that, and more votes against it than on the SNP amendment. Leaving the shipbuilding, I suppose, Maureen, the problem is that parliaments last for 5 years and shipbuilding plans last for 20 years, so it's not perceived as a great vote winner. But moving on to a financial story, Northern Rock mortgage prisoners, as they're called, take the TSB subsidiary, which has taken them over to court. A group of Northern Rock customers who claimed they became mortgage prisoners after the lender's collapse went to court today to try to get compensation from the bank that bought their loans. About 2,500 borrowers whose home loans were sold to TSB's subsidiary Whistle Free are involved in a case over what they say are inflated interest rates on their debt. Rather than being put on TSB's normal standard variable rate, SVR, when they were transferred, they've been charged a separate rate, which is higher. While the TSB rate now stands at 7.25%, Whistle Tree's equivalent is at 9.54%. The group of current and former Whistle Tree borrowers are part of a wider cohort of about 47,000 households who had loans with Northern Rock and Bradford and Bingley until the banks failed in the 2008 financial crisis. Many had taken out interest-only mortgages. Some had self-certificated their income rather than having to prove it, and some took on loans of more than 100% loans to value. These circumstances have meant that some have been unable to switch to a new, cheaper deal, meaning they came to be known as mortgage prisoners. About 27,000 mortgage holders were transferred to Whistle Tree in 2016. Since then, more than 2/3 of Whistle Tree customers have switched to a different deal or closed their mortgage, but those on its standard variable rate have paid more than if they were on TSB's equivalent variable rate. Olivia Selle, senior associate at the law firm taking the action, Harkes Parker, said that this meant these borrowers may have paid $15,000 to $30,000 more than had they been on the better rate. She said the court proceedings, expected to take 4 days, would examine whether the decision to put the borrowers on a separate SVR had breached the contract that they had with Northern Rock, and whether there was an implied term that rates should not be set unfairly or capriciously. The court's decision, expected in the autumn, will set the terms for further actions by the borrowers. Other than the rights and wrongs of this, Maureen, what amazes me, what horrifies me is how long it's gone on. We're talking about the financial crisis of 2008, and this is still having an effect on people in 2025. Over the years, there have been so many financial protection agencies set up by government that have not been able to solve this problem.
Yeah, I mean, I can't, like you, Douglas, I can't understand why it hasn't been sorted by the Financial Conduct Authority or the Financial Ombudsman, and I'm baffled as to why they've had to go to court on this. And you wonder how a judge will come to a definitive decision on this, wondering whether any precedent for this. But it must be so harrowing for those involved, and clearly they've reached the end of their tether if they're having to take court action, which in itself, as we know, is hugely expensive. So I hope they've got good lawyers. I hope they've had good advice, and it would be great if they got a good outcome on this. It'll be interesting if that judgment then has an effect on other things.
Moving across the Atlantic now to the United States, Kamala Harris has secured the support of the majority of Democratic delegates, signaling she is likely to become her party's nominee against Republican Donald Trump next month, according to an Associated Press survey taken in the aftermath of President Joe Biden's decision to drop his bid for re-election. By Monday night, Kamala Harris had received the support of at least 2,471 delegates, according to AP, more than the 1,976 delegates she'll need to win on a first ballot. No other candidate was named by a delegate contacted by the Associated Press. California State Democratic Chairman Rusty Hicks said 75% to 80% of the state's delegation were on a call Tuesday, and they unanimously supported Harris. California has 496 delegates, the highest of any state. The Texas delegation to the DNC has also said it endorses Harris. Texas has 273 delegates, the third highest after California and New York. The New York delegation to the DNC has endorsed Harris, it confirmed on X. New York has 307 delegates. Kamala Harris is continuing to consolidate the support of Democrats and is expected to gain the endorsements of the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries. They're holding a joint press conference where they're expected to announce their backing of the Vice President. Two new polls indicate Harris is tied or slightly behind Donald Trump among voters nationally, closing the gap that had opened between Trump and Joe Biden. Earlier today, the Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheatle resigned, following a bipartisan furore over whether her agency had adequately protected Donald Trump in the lead up to the assassination attempt against him. Well, can't say that politics in the United States is boring with this happening, and a lot of pivots required. I saw the Russian propaganda stations were talking about Kamala Harris today, and all sorts of racist diatribe that her with a nuclear button is like a monkey with a grenade, and calling her a grinning devil. But it's going to be difficult for the Republicans as well. I mean, they started off by having an opponent who they claimed was too old and doddery to be president, and now they have an opponent who's young enough to be Trump's daughter. So how do you see things going, Maureen?
Well, I think first of all, I think we should recognise the huge of good that Joe Biden has done throughout his political career, and not just as the last 4 years as president. And it's rather sad that he has to leave in such circumstances, but I do think he's doing the right thing for the United States. I am so excited about Kamala Harris being now hopefully the president nominee for the Democrats, both a woman and a woman of colour at the same time. Who would have thought? And I really do hope that she is not challenged for that position. I think Donald Trump's got a cheek about calling it, a coronation when it's been little else that's happened to him. And I'm sure he is worried, because I'm sure she will have more appeal to women in the United States, especially when Trump is threatening to reintroduce the very strict abortion laws. And I think she will appeal to younger people, although she is around about 60, I think. So I think it will re-energize the election campaign in the US, and I really hope it goes smoothly for her and the Democrats, and that they see off Trump for once and for all.
Thank you. Kamala will not be pleased. She's only 59. She's not 60 yet, so so just a young thing. So Scottish news now. The Scottish Government has announced £41.7 million to be invested in bus decarbonisation. First Minister John Swinney has announced that an innovative bus industry consortium will deliver 250 new zero-emission buses and coaches to Scotland's roads, backed by Scottish Government investment. £41.7 million grant funding will support 8 operators led by electric vehicle fleet specialist Zenobē to deliver the buses along with a Scotland-wide charging network for use by all buses, coaches and HGVs. The investment completes the second and final round of subsidy from the Scottish Zero Emission Bus Challenge Fund, ScotZEB2, which brings together businesses from across the bus, energy and financial sectors and builds upon £130 million the Scottish Government has already invested in zero-emission buses and supporting infrastructure. First Minister John Swinney said, "Supporting zero-carbon buses as a sustainable means of public transport across Scotland will connect communities and open up new economic and social opportunities. This investment will deliver 100 new intercity bus routes and reduce greenhouse gas emissions by more than 600,000 tonnes over the lifetime of the fleet by encouraging more people to swap the car for efficient public transport, which is crucial to reaching net zero by 2045. Every £1 from the Scottish Government will leverage £3.20 of private sector investment, demonstrating that our shared decarbonisation goals can be met by working together when it comes to removing carbon emissions from our bus and coach fleets. All bus and coach operators, including those operating in smaller towns and communities, will benefit from both the novel approach to financing and the Scotland-wide charging network that will be delivered, helping other modes of transport make the switch to electric vehicles too." Well, I would say something of a good news story there, and for all the criticism which was levelled at the Scottish Government for slipping on climate standards, clearly this is a step in the right direction in conjunction with the urban low emission zones which came in June. Maureen?
Yeah, I mean, transport is one of the areas of high emissions of greenhouse gases. This is a really good news story to continue to see a reduction in our greenhouse gas emissions. Of course, in Aberdeen, we've had hydrogen buses for many years, but clearly there are not enough hydrogen stations yet throughout the country. I'm sure that will come. And of course, Scotland already has a higher proportion of electric service stations than the rest of the UK. So I think this is a really good news story, and the Scottish Government getting on with the business of government.
Thank you very much. That's pretty much all we have time for tonight. I would like to thank Maureen for being our guest once again. Always interesting to listen to. Those of you who listened to the Full Scottish may have missed Maureen the last time with a very good tip on the Sunday, which was the Wimbledon final and the Euro football final, and she suggested a Spanish double, which was correct. So, as I've not been able to make it along to Pittodrie this evening because of this programme, what's the score tonight between Aberdeen and Airdrie going to be, Maureen?
Oh golly, you can never rely on Aberdeen. They can beat the best teams and then lose to the worst teams, and it's too early in the season for them, so you never know. They're probably going to lose because it takes them so long during the season to get any momentum going, I think. So I'm not going to predict this one, Douglas.
Okay. Gosh, and I thought we were going to end on 2 good news stories there as well. That's it for this evening. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. Right now, we urgently need to increase our donations if we are to be able to pay our bills. We face costs of over £5,000 every month, but our income is just over £2,000 a month, and we are now facing mounting debts. Please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you again to you for watching, and to Maureen Watt, our guest tonight. Goodbye, and thank you for watching.